in terms of like speaking like that, you could compare it to Argent in a way, but we don't go for the narrative of wallets whatsoever. It's just that this is essentially a leveraged smart contract wallet. That's what it ends up being. Next one, please. In terms of like speaking like that, if you have 10 each, then you get 9, right? The first question would be, since there is no KYC in the platform, why isn't it taking your money out? So the protocol on the leverage side will have security policies in place. To be exact, first of all, that was the allowed list, and the allowed list exposes assets and the protocols. So you cannot just go to a new contract, approve it, and get all the money drained, because then you can just do yourself as an attacker. The DAO has to vet and approve all the protocols. The second goes for also ERC20 assets, and that is if you create a WSA token and Uniswap and you just extend leverage by it. To them, because as soon as essentially your position goes wrong, let's say you went X10 in the farm and the asset depegged, everything else, the liquidation would occur, in which case LPs would get their capital back, and you would lose proportionally as in like in any other leverage situation, essentially. Next one, please. This one more so in terms of the narrative. Like, it's not about leverage as in DYDX, where DYDX focuses on pretty much like X10, BTC or ETH in a, well, let's not call it fully decentralized way, but in a way decentralized. This is more like a middle leverage layer for everything that you can imagine. It's all done on chain, so there are no trust scores, no reputation and other things. They could be introduced later on as a fun, interesting part of the protocol, but otherwise, there is no need to know who any party is. It can all be bots, protocols, persons, firms, doesn't matter. Next one, please. We can, of course, talk more about integrations and other stuff, but I'm not sure if, from the user perspective, it's very interesting. This one we don't need to play, I guess. For that, we can just show the new interface. Yeah. This one also redundant. We can skip from it. We already talked about leverage as a narrative. Let's say like this, are there any questions so far? Because we went through the architecture quite quickly, and apologies, that was a bit messed up since we haven't done these presentations in a while. But please shoot your questions, ask. Otherwise, we can get into some examples of strategies that could be possible.
I've got a question. So it looks like you onboard these different strategies through the DAO. They're approved by the DAO. What happens to the yields that are deployed, that are earned by deposits in the credit account? Like, is like yield, like obviously you've got like if you've got convex or curve or less so with YEarn, you're going to have multiple different token yields coming back. Are those, they have to be claimed by the credit account smart contract, right?
Credit account users, yes, essentially they claim it. So we can jump into the interface in a bit to see how that's in practice. But of course, you don't have to have an interface. You can do it on chain. You, as a leverage user, you decide where the yields are sourced. So all the strategies, they are not forced onto you. So it's not like a vault. Rather that the protocol has essentially an allowed list of protocols and assets you can interact with. But how you borrow, when you deploy the capital, whether you go long or short, or just passively farming, that is all up to you as a user. So you as a user eventually decide that whether the yield that you are earning, for example, a convex farm would now be higher than, let's say, some curve farm, right? Because it doesn't have CVX emissions. So if you end up borrowing at a rate and then curve rates are lower than what you paid for to borrow, well, that's just you as a bad leverage user. You can do that, right? Nobody restricts you. Over time, over like many weeks, maybe the debt from interest rate accruing would maybe run into you, but it will take many, probably months till that happens. Like as we've seen recently with the, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say like that makes sense to me, but I guess what I'm like as you say, the borrowed funds all go into this credit account that you then have the ability to direct as a borrower, right? But obviously you can't just drain that. So I guess like I sort of a kind of a technical implementation question where if you're deploying funds into any arbitrary farm from the credit account, then I guess your contract basically makes any yields earned on that deployment claimable by you, right? So it kind of passes it on through directly back to you. I see. Okay, that makes sense.
So it's essentially every user has their own smart contract. Like when you open a credit account, we can get to it in a bit. You get your own smart contract that you can obviously see the address in Etherscan. So all of the transactions and everything happening there, you can see through Etherscan. And eventually, when you LP into Curve, that smart contract then has the Curve LP tokens and stuff like that. So all of that is visible.
Is that a fairly heavy overhead to onboard a new strategy then? Because you'd need to sort of understand what the yields are, like what form they come in and where to get them. Right?
So every protocol requires a different integration. Like let's say since Curve and Convex integration have been done, they took quite some time. After that, adding new pools within these protocols is fairly simple. Now, if there was something to be like a Curve question, would those devs then fully rewrite Curve? Right then, of course, the way things are claimed, the way things are work and counted would change. That would require more work, but it's basically not as complex as it might sound. And also, even if it was as complex, there aren't like 100 protocols that you might want to integrate. Because end of the day, it's a similar question to how you view risk from the asset perspective. Like, yes, there are like 1,000, I don't know, you call them digital assets, altcoins, whatever it is. There are 1,000 assets that are decent, but are not as liquid. So yes, you want to add them, but the protocol risk you take from it is probably not going to be matching. Like you're just underwriting something that's illiquid, right? And that's what we've seen with Mango, and that's what I think the new autistic thread essentially, right? About, oh, let's pump the token by $100 million. Well, that's the thing. If you add the liquid assets, you will run into these issues as well. So in this case too, like you wouldn't want to integrate 100 protocols. You could though, but that will take time. Yes.
Who's responsible for that? Does
anybody can do it. So, well, yeah, like it's easy to say everybody can do it because that's how factual it is, right? All of this is open source. All of this has been audited many times. There are now different contributors working on it. There is no one company controlling it all. So conceptually and truthfully speaking, anyone can do it. It just then needs to be approved by the DAO. And there are some risk committees who can advise that something like, let's say, is too risky, right? Something less risky. But of course, the first protocols are written by whoever started Gearbox, essentially. Because it takes time to get to know the system. It takes time for the system to try to become relevant, for people to actually take time and look into it properly. So yeah.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Thank you for the great question. Yep. So in terms of like strategies, so just to rephrase slightly a bit, usually what we're used to in DeFi, when you earn yields, you have vaults, right? There is something who wrote a smart contract that essentially claims, does things for you, all of that, all at the same time, like wire and vaults, for instance. With Gearbox, it's a bit different because Gearbox specify what assets and protocols you can interact with, but strategies, how they're written, you decide yourself. So you as a user, or you even as a protocol that does vault. So you could build a leverage vault using Gearbox, and as long as all the assets are there, you don't even need to approve by the DAO any new contracts. You just introduce some other logic into it with multi-call, and then it's fairly easy and gas efficient. So what can you do then? Like what, as a middle leverage layer, what stuff can be done in V2? For instance, you could leverage, what is it? What's this one on screen here? Oh, that's like leverage farming. The rates are a bit outdated. They were previously this ridiculous. Now, of course, they're smaller. But you just take, you have, let's say, DAI. You put DAI as collateral. You borrow X9. You put it into a convex farm with a stable coin. And because stables are correlated, so they're not one-to-one, but they're correlated close enough with an LTV 90 plus, you can take higher leverage. If, let's say, you were using an altcoin or even Ethereum as a collateral, the LTV of those assets would be lower, so the max leverage would be like X5, X6 only. But yeah, you can, for example, leverage stablecoin farming and convex Curve wire, all essentially the same vaults because they utilize Curve LP tokens. In terms of specific assets, specific strategies you could be doing it with, that is GUSD, So Gemini, right? LUSD, Beam Liquidity, Frax 3 CRV, and Frax USDC, I believe. Those two for now, without the Frax BP. Synthetics USD, so SUSD. And okay, so what else do we have?
You mean
I think that's the starting set, right?
Or other?
No, I mean like the other stablecoin farms.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay, that's it, yeah. So this one, leverage stablecoin farming, that has been done, for example, by Alpha Camora before. The same product idea was used on other chains. So this one has always had success. Now, of course, we know the discourse on treasury yields being higher than DeFi yields and stables, right? All of that. Gearbox is not an exception in this, that it's not the best environment to launch in, but still it is possible. And those rates would at some point somehow return. So that's another question. Next one, please. What is cool is while leverage stablecoin farming was possible before, what wasn't possible is actually turning those into leveraged directional positions. So what happens is you can, for example, provide collateral as Ethereum or WBTC. You borrow more of that, so the credit account you open is denominated with debt in, let's say, WBTC or ETH. So you borrow more of that. What you do then, you sell it to USDC or to DAI or to USDT, doesn't matter. That means you effectively have a short at whatever leverage you borrowed. But then those stable coins, instead of keeping them idle, because that is how essentially it would have worked to centralize the changes, you just have a short or a long, and that's it. Those stable coins are still in your credit account. So you can put them into the same farming positions, wire and convex, doesn't matter. So what you have now is you have a short that is farming. As such, it could even be repaying your borrower fees or even making money. So you have like a self-repaying short in a way, or a self-repaying long. Next one. Leverage liquid staking. So ETH and ETH derivatives, probably in the current environment, are the only true decent source of organic yield, because ETH organic staking and LDO rewards are quite fat in terms of like the juiciness. So what you can do, of course, you can just leverage that. But it's different from leveraging, let's say, on Compound, AVA, how it was done before, because again, there, when you were getting yields, those yields were endogenous. So that means that the deposit rate of one asset was lower, was higher than the borrow rate of another asset, right? That was the point. That if you loop a few times, you can arbitrage that. With Gearbox, all the yields and where you source those yields from is external. So you essentially borrow ETH or WSTH in V2 as well, and then you put it in the curve, and then you put it in the convex, or even in YEarn now, because YEarn dropped their 220 fees. And that's basically leverage liquid staking. You can, of course, do more, like there are a few different ETH strategies you can run, but that's at least the one that seems to be most popular across different DeFi users. Next one, please. There is a bunch of stuff about the DAO, the audits, the security, some other things. I don't know if that's interesting or relevant. So maybe let's get back to questions and run through interface, because that could be more visual and interesting. Please shoot questions. Did that make sense? And the strategies you can do?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. We have time to run through interface, right?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Ilgis, could you please open yours, since mine doesn't seem to work?
Yeah, 1 second, please.
I think we could look into, I don't know, the earn dashboard. We can look at that to explain it, since liquidity mining is starting next week, it seems. And then we can, of course, run through a few strategies.
Yep. Do you see my screen?
Yep. You want to talk through it yourself? Yep.
Let's say what kind of scenario you want to show, and I can pick that.
Yeah, so as we previously remember the chart where on the left there were liquidity providers, on the right credit account leverage takers. So this is the left side, the earn, again, supply, withdraw. The APY, of course, is the organic borrow fee that borrowers are paying to you, minus whatever the DAO makes as a protocol fee. And then the second part is the liquidity mining that is currently being undervoted, and that should start live on next Monday. So that will be like
what to say that
gear bootstrap ceremony. Yeah.
Barely test this net application, yeah, not real one.
Yep, yeah. So the rates, everything you see here are fabricated. I think let's go to credit accounts.
Not fabricated, it's not real numbers, yeah. It's a real working application on Girdle testnet.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Let's go to credit accounts and the strategies. If you click on strategies, please. Yeah. So there are like two ways. Could you go back actually? So there are like a few different ways to open a credit account and utilize leverage. Of course, if you do on-chain contracts and stuff, you don't even need to have a look at interface since the code will be open source. But in this case, you can either just open a credit account yourself. And again, a credit account is where you select the debt asset and then you choose a leverage factor and then you essentially open your own smart contract. And the other one is choosing a strategy that are part of the pre-baked ones. So those strategies, they're not actually separate contracts that you ape into. What they do is just with the use of multi-call. So Gearbox V2 has an adapted multi-call. That multi-call, what it does is, if you could click on it, it essentially opens a credit account for you, then swaps whatever assets needed to the ones that are required by the farm you're choosing, and then it deposits into that farm. So it basically does all the steps for you without having to pay gas fees. Like imagine if you want to ape into Convex, you first have to swap the assets to the ones that Curve LP farm needs, right? Then you'll P into Curve with a couple of approvals in between. Then you take Curve LP tokens, put them in Convex, a bunch of gas and time. Here you do it with one click, like truly. Ilgis, we can run through it maybe once. Choose Convex ST ETHCRV. Yeah. That's the main LIDO pool of STH to ETH. So here, for example, put, I don't know, 1 ETH. Don't mind the limits that you see in the interface for now. They're just small to not break the fake asset pools and girly. You choose the leverage. Since you have only one farm at this stage, it can even calculate the liquidation price for you, meaning at what point of STH price would liquidation occur. Anything above that, you can just stay in and they basically wait for the peg to recover. Yes, so you can like, if you need to approve or anything, you see how much you get and then you just ape in, that's it. So it simplifies the leverage usage for anybody who is new. And honestly, leverage is so complex that we so far don't even think there needs to be thousands of users on that side, given that, as we know, whenever unsophisticated users try to do leverage, they get wrecked. And I'm not talking about investor protection and bullshit like that, that doesn't work. Talking about just the fact that when people don't know enough and they ape in, they usually get wrecked. So maybe the interface and the protocol being complex on this side is actually okay. Or maybe that's just how we make ourselves sleep better for not doing a perfect job. But we'll try to improve. Yep, did it approve? Yep, so essentially with one click, you go from having no credit account and no leverage to having a credit account open and having leverage there. Actually, Ilgis, if you could open Etherscan and to show how that basically went through. If you can show the credit account, yeah.
It's not open yet, yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. You can just click the first transaction and show what happened there. You don't need to see the latest one. Just click on the from. Yeah. Oh, you didn't open it yet. Sorry. I'm stupid. Yes. Go back. You're right. Girly has been slow the last couple of weeks. Okay, here. So you can see all of the steps that happened there, put it in the farm and everything like that. And this token holder in here is essentially your credit account. So that is your leveraged wallet that all the operations go through. You can see in here that there is the balance of it, which is now the farm that you aped in. Why do you have a bunch of CRV on it? Did you hack it?
I don't know. Good question.
Fake? I don't know, strange. We'll look into it later. But if you click on the ERC20 balance, you can see ERC20 tokens. You can see the balance of everything. No, All that, yeah, doesn't matter. So it essentially simplified all these processes. And you can, of course, track whatever everybody is farming to see what they're doing.
Maybe I just open another sum.
Yeah, that's a different one. You just had a bunch of operations there. No, that makes sense, yeah. So does this make sense so far, how that works and how you could utilize it? Or you want to go into some specific strategies maybe? What are you guys actually farming? Like, what are the farms that you're currently in, if you are in any?
Aladdin people love convex and curves, so this is a good example.
Cool, yeah, that was our assumption also. Like, we were looking at what is really liquid enough to be safe and what is something that seems to be not fading out in the next few weeks, because this was already built in March. After that, there was a lot of modification, improvements, audits, and stuff like that. So luckily, those survived. Frax BP was the only change that happened after that we didn't account for, since it's quite recent. But it could be added soon enough, since it's not too complex, as it's just a wrapper contract. Yeah, but anything specific in curve and convex that you do?
Well, I mean, lots of lots of sort of just farming LP positions and looping up, like sort of constant, like on the Aladdin side, we tend to want to maximize earning in assets like CVX and CRV, right? So we tend to try to build strategies that sort of concentrate into those assets and grow them as much as possible.
And how do you do that? Unless it's a secret you don't want to disclose? Like, what's the specific design, specific choice making that goes behind it?
Well, I mean, the vaults that we design generally harvest, like they're relatively simple, are harvesting yield and concentrating into into those tokens that we like, and then deploying those tokens to like a second staking opportunity to sort of compound the yields at the staking rate, or conversely, accepting those yields as collateral and then sort of minting synthetic tokens against the future yield, and then using those to sort of spin up in leverage. I'm still kind of trying to think about the ways that the gearbox like mechanism can sort of synergize and integrate with that. It's not straightforward.
So you
very
just repeat the last part, the synthetic token that you mentioned, because curious to understand it more, to see how we can probably aid with that or like try to integrate.
Well, one of the things that Aladdin, the DAO, one of the products Aladdin the DAO has been working on recently is Clever, which is this way of, so basically people can lock their CVX as collateral, and then in the background the whole bribe harvesting mechanism is automated, and you know, in parallel with that, users borrow against that CVX that they locked, right? They can borrow a small, like up to 50% LTV on a synthetic CVX, which is the tokenization basically of the future yield, right? As the CVX you deposited is harvested, the bribes are harvested for maximum yield. It pays the debt down, and then that synthetic CVX can be sort of turned into real CVX over time, or you can swap it into CVX now and create a loop sort of manually. If that makes sense.
It's more like what they do with VC, with Wire and CRV as well, right? The deposits now, in a way, not directly, but like you create a secondary market for the synthetic one, which is actually earning, and you can loop it that way, essentially. Not fully, but that's what it reminds me of.
Yes, it's along those lines, exactly.
I'm thinking about this. One of the thoughts is, and you know, like, this is my first time looking at Gearbox, so this will be like a shallow perspective right now anyway. But I think it makes sense to do this at the very front end of Clever. Yeah. So like if Clever were essentially, you know, one of the approved third-party protocols, I mean, it's leverage on leverage, so we're getting into serious degen territory, but that's okay. That's what we're all here for. You know, like leveraging into Clever, which will then give you the leverage Clev CVX tokens. I mean, that's actually pretty damn cool.
Well, it's interesting
You know?
because one of the way Clever works is that there are no liquidations, right? Because you're
Right,
borrowing
right.
you're borrowing a synthetic of the same thing of the same token that you're collateral. You're providing as collateral. So there's no liquidation possible there. So maybe that would be you still have to worry about liquidation on the front end, right? But
Yeah.
like leveraging into Clever and then adding another like looping that a couple of times.
Yeah.
As long as that is liquid and it's possible. So conceptually,
Well,
it is.
Gearbox can integrate anything that has an oracle and is, let's say, deep enough. And deep enough in terms of liquidity is a subjective term, right? Always changes in a way. So for now, we use Chainlink oracles simply because there isn't something better that we have found. As that improves, of course, it can be like other backup oracles can be introduced. But what oracle is there for the asset price? Is there one or just not yet?
Well, there isn't just basically the only way to, so I'm thinking out loud here, but I'm not actually sure how well it would work since you have to lock CVX, right? It's locked into VL CVX. So it's not fully liquid, right? Like you can't, you can't instantly close a position, although I say that, but it is possible to close a position by, I guess, liquidating yourself, paying your loan back early, right? Like if you borrow 50% of the value of the CVX that you have provided, you can close your position out in principle, but that CVX that you provided as collateral is still vote locked. So you don't actually get the CVX back until the underlying convex lock expires.
Yeah, totally makes
But
sense. So
that-
conceptually speaking, sorry.
That must
Go ahead.
Well, that must work for you today because wasn't Convex one of your third-party accounts or third parties that you
Probably the
that you
so what we did with Convex is, well, I mean the developers, I'm just a shit poster. What they did is they created essentially phantom tokens, and not phantom the blockchain, but more like phantom as in like ghost, because Convex doesn't give you back LP tokens, right? So the question is, okay, Curve does, you can liquidate those. Convex doesn't. So within a credit account, the Convex position is denominated in phantom tokens essentially. That behave the same as LP tokens, right? Because in Convex, you can also pull LP price share essentially just in a different way and stuff like that. So Convex positions are at all times liquid. Now, in the case that you're describing, it would be possible in the setup that Gearbox currently has, but Gearbox is modular. So pools, credit accounts, credit managers, and other stuff like risks can all be isolated and be taken apart. For instance, once we look at the new integrations like options or like some other stuff, they have strike prices, right? And before a strike hits, you don't even know at what value position will hold. Like you can, if it's in the same asset, you can know the minimal value it will deliver back, right? That you can know. But if you're going cross collateral, for example, you borrow a different asset, you don't know how much an option position that you are in can drop compared to the debt asset that you have. So in that case, credit managers, which is one of the glue pieces between that like modular architecture, could actually be redone in a way where we have both the fixed rates and the fixed timing. So LPs that would get in on those would understand that they're lending something at a duration, so they cannot at all time pull out. And it's not the same as under-collateralized lending, because under-collateralized lending also, you don't know when you can pull out, right? You know only the maturity in some cases, and you don't even know where the money goes. Like you just give money to Alameda and that's it. In this case, we're speaking about, right, there you would know where the money is in, you wouldn't even see it. You just wouldn't be able to liquidate 24/7. So that's conceptually possible. Ilgis, did I explain it in a correct way, or would you relate it differently?
No, you are correct. Yeah.
Cool.
That's interesting because I think that the convex vote lock could be treated similarly, right? Because it's in order to earn bribes on CVX, you have to vote lock it, and the vote lock duration is minimum 16 weeks. So even if you did, like if you decide you need to liquidate the position halfway through, you can't until those tokens become unlocked at the end of that 16-week period. But there's no way to know what the price would be at the end of that 16-week period.
Exactly.
Right?
So I was going to ask, like, what would be a debt asset? Like, let's say, of course, it could be anything potentially, right? But what would you want the debt asset to be? Because if it's just CVX, right, you just want to leverage CVX to CVX with a high leverage. The question is, who would provide that CVX? So that's one of the issues why creation, shorting, or like markets, leverage markets, especially in a decentralized way, is difficult for altcoins, because who would lend their altcoins essentially in this way? Like, in what case would you lend your CVX instead of just being on the other side?
Yeah,
Because when you look at like
in the
ETH or because
Yeah,
if you look at
I'm not
ETH or
agree.
USDC,
I'm not agree
Sorry.
here, Ivan, with you, because like for me, it's like some prediction market. Somebody lock it for 16 weeks and have some prediction how much money he will receive back in 16 weeks. And other sides, it's like, okay, they can put their money, borrow their money. And if they agree, they can be a liquidity provider on this side. So it's like some prediction market game here. So I guess there will be some demand for it, and there will be some market. I don't know the size of this market, but it should work.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, like, your fundamental question, Ivan, is one of the things that we had to think about a lot when like putting together the original, like the initial idea of Clever, is who's providing the CVX that people are swapping their synthetic into, right? It's the same question. And you know, the answer to that for on our side is, you know, the harvesting mechanism on the back end. When those yields are harvested, the protocol takes a fee, right? And then the protocol fees are distributed to lockers of the protocol token, and so you can kind of, you basically are letting the CVX providers farm those the fees that the protocol takes in order to provide that CVX to the people who want to take the leverage and loop it.
Yeah, in your design totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I was wrong. Thanks for correcting. Cool. But yeah, actually, speaking potential, like as Gearbox as a middle leverage layer, it would be a question of like DeFi was 24/7 as a concept. Let's say in the last cycle, right? Everything was like a vault, 24/7 rebalancing, everything like that. And as we go further, we see that products that have maturity, that have fixed rate, they have no liquidation and other stuff becoming more of a thing. And that's because TradFi loves it like that, right? Because that's what they're used to. It doesn't mean, so it's a question like, what do you think? Like, would that stand the same way or would they change over time? Because like, imagine if Wire and Wolves had like a 1 day out of 30 days withdrawal limit and Curve LP tokens as well and Uniswap too. I haven't much experienced DeFi myself. Like I use Prime Brokerage, but like very, very lightly. And everything there just seems like absolute shit. So personally don't want DeFi to become that, even though many products recently seem to resemble what TradFi wants to see.
Yeah.
Yep, but basically with V2, what in terms of the plans, like in terms of like what you could, for example, farm or take advantage of, or the protocol takes advantage of you if you're a bad trader. We'll see how it goes. The earn side should have liquidity mining start on Monday. So it's currently under voting. The vote started for V2 just today. So they should finish on Sunday, and then Monday, Tuesday, all the implementations and all the execution. So the passive side, the earn, will just have one asset liquidity provisioning. So if you can jump to that tab, there are 5 assets: DAI, USDC as stables, and then ETH as an alternative, and then also Wrapped STH. So Wrapped STH, of course, already accrues ETH rewards into itself. And then WBTC. So all of those would have liquidity mining in there. So if you have a bunch of idle assets that you just want to earn some gear tokens for, you can do that. As for credit accounts, if you can jump to that tab, there again, Curve, Convex, Lido, and a bunch of other variations you can do. I think if you go to the farm tab, that one, we can just scroll through it. Yeah, so there is there is the convex curve and wire and iterations for every different pool, which is just all Curve LP tokens essentially. There is LUSD, Frax, Synthetics USD, GUSD, STH, and I think that's pretty much it for now. Those seem to be the only liquid and safe enough options that are still there with the yields, with the exception of some Frax BPC, which we will try to work on later, and also MIM. But is MIM safe? Like, I haven't kept up with it much. I know there was some accusations of insolvency a couple of months ago when they swapped into some altcoin. Is it like fully good now, or do you know, guys?
It's been pretty stable, but their TVL it's never come back. It's just gone down and down and down. So
I think it's open to interpretation. They accept a
Yeah.
lot of weird they accept a lot of weird collateral, but they do have pretty low limits on the really wacky stuff. So I don't know.
yeah,
Answer is I don't know. Ask somebody.
Yeah,
smarter.
same. Yeah.
Maybe Cody
not
knows.
popular. Yeah, not as popular among the AladdinDAO team as I mean it once was way back in the day in my mind, but I've stayed away from it personally.
Which one are you talking about, Kruger? I missed the name of it.
Mim.
Mim.
Talk about abracadabra.
Oh, honestly, I haven't caught up with that in forever, to be honest. I mean, it's definitely nowhere near what it used to be.
Yeah.
I were just wondering if people are still worried that it might be like insolvent or sort of broken in some way. I don't think so though.
Probably a valid concern, but I don't honestly know.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, because like it's one of the things on Convex and Curve still that is still like pretty liquid. Like it's a decent liquid, decent yields. But yeah, that's the issue. And that seems to be the issue with many DeFi protocols where since it doesn't go up anymore, people are like, whatever, screw it, right? Like it's fine. And then slow milking happens as in like just draining DAO treasury for whatever purposes, slowly.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's what we do. That should go live on 27th, 28th as multi-sig execution does all the votes. And yeah, let's see how it goes. Of course, not the best environment to launch in, given the rates and DeFi are now essentially at the rates that US Treasury yields offer, which sucks. But for now, that's the reality. In terms of like current product offering, SDH derivative style strategies are still pretty good. They still yield a lot. So they should be okay. Stables, personally, I jumped out of stablecoin farming back in June. I was just getting shit scared of something depegging. I shouldn't have because I was on LUSD pool and something else, and they stayed very stable, and even LUSD went up in price, so could have arbitraged that in a way. But yeah, later on, we probably would be working on Balancer and Aura integration, or at least we'll try to work on. And then UniV2, UniV3 liquidity provisioning. At least those two things seem like the most important stuff. There is also some idea of trying to do cross-chain, especially on Optimism and maybe with Arbitrum a bit later. But so far, there aren't too many liquid farms around on other blockchains either. So we don't see the need to really cross-deploy everywhere because there wouldn't be much resource really. Or are you guys actually farming on Optimism or Arbitrum or somewhere else? I'm just curious, like, because we don't keep really good track since we were busy, but maybe there are a bunch of good farms that we don't know.
I feel like there probably are an Arbitrum maybe.
Yeah, I'm a Arbitrum fan, but I haven't scoured, the projects. I mean, I'm primarily on there for GMX, and I know and I know that there are others. I just haven't spent as much time on there, but I am a fan of Arbitrum.
My sense is that
Personally.
a lot of farming collapsed back to mainnet as the sort of bear kicked in.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I had a quick question. When you mentioned like UniV3 provision, thing like that, are you guys planning on like rolling out your own system for provision there, or partnering with like one of the teams that are sort of building that? Because I know it's really hard.
Oh, so that is a good question. It's actually two separate parts. So one of them is just integrating with UniV3 optimizers that work like vaults, right? Brahma, Mellow, I think Gamma if they are still alive, and others. So
yeah, like Iraq
that is like,
kind of stuff.
yeah, exactly. Oh, exactly. Iraq. So that is just like having their vaults or like farms, however you call it, be approved by Gearbox DAO as a separate contract, separate asset. That is one. And then the other one is like trying to allow for UniV2, UniV3 provisioning of LP in just where a credit account can calculate the value of your position and you decide how that works. That might be a bit more complex though, because the LTV of most of the assets you would LP in would be very low. So if we're talking about leveraging on LP on decent stuff, I think that's pretty much just ETH/USDC, right? WBTC DAI, and Arrakis already has that. Or was it Oasis app that had? Anyway, those two. So we'll see. It's a cool thing to have like as a primitive going further, but I'm not sure what the immediate advantages would be to have that stuff. Like there isn't much yield left out there.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, especially with the yields the way they are now on that, it's honestly it's really hard to come out ahead being an LP in that kind of farm or in that kind of like LP pool.
Yep.
Especially if you're like solely on chain. If like you can have, you know, different centralized venues to sort of like hedge your exposure here and there, like you can maybe do it, but a purely on chain thing is really difficult to come out ahead.
Yeah, because let's say if you let's say market makers like Wintermute maybe would benefit to have more leverage in this case. It's like where they have ETH themselves, right? And then they need to provide liquidity to some altcoin that, let's say, magically has a chain link workaround that's not a new asset but has been there for a while. Question is, how big would they be as an LP in that? Because if they're the largest, then basically Gearbox is the largest LP in that asset. It means it's like systemic in a way. So, and if it's not, the LTV would still need to be pretty low for that other asset. So even if they start with ETH and let's say they go X5 leverage, which is still pretty safe with a decent health factor, as soon as they swap 50% of the position into the altcoin, essentially they LP in for, that brings the LTV and health factor, I think, actually pretty low. So yeah, that's, Ilgis, is that how it works? Like if you're talking about UniV3 or UniV2 provisioning in that way, is that the risk or do I actually misunderstand how our shit works?
I don't think that it's a big risk actually. The problem I see here is that the vision of the UniV3 is like very complicated task, and it's very difficult to achieve some revenue here. And UniV3 design actually implements some leverage inside of here because you can put on Monero interval, and actually this is the leveraging of your UniV2 position, for example. So I'm not sure that actually there is a need for leveraging of UniV3, for example.
There could be something interesting with like, especially if there are like, you know, altcoins, shitcoins to borrow, then like you actually do have the opportunity to maybe make some semi-profitable strategies like provisioning on V3. But again, it's a pretty tough problem. There's protocols that are solely focused on that. So that's why I ask like if you guys would sort of partner with people like that rather than trying to figure it out all yourself, because it'd be a pretty big undertaking.
Yeah, indeed. Like in cases with Curve and Convex, at least that has been alive for like a year plus. And they have different tools that have proven to be liquid enough and decently big enough to offer leverage to them. While in UniV3 cases, there are only a handful of pools where it would be even okay to provide for. And there are literally like 10 people that really supply liquidity there in a non-stupid way. Like, of course, anybody can be an LP, but in many cases they shouldn't because they're just losing. So yeah, probably in this case, at least at first, it's more a risk counted for to just partner with some of those who work on it. Or just let it go for a while, just see how it goes. Before an actual, like, because there's the thing with many protocols that could be considered for an integration with Gearbox that you could be working on. Like many of them make sense, many of them are cool because, leverage anything anywhere is a fun concept. But when you look into it, if a TVL of a farm is like 10 million, how much more Gearbox can really provide leverage into that and how safe is it? Which of course it's a silly metric to base your development on during bear market, given everything is at zero. But still, if you're talking about risk and where you see it going, you really need to have solid ideas on why that would be like 100 plus. But that's for devs to do. So shit posting doesn't stop anyway. Okay, cool. I think we're running close. Sorry, Shin, go ahead.
So, can you talk a little bit about V1? I remember it was quite phenomenal when you guys launched the V1. Can you talk about, what's the takeaway there, what you guys did right and wrong?
Great question. Actually, I'll pull up had some notes for the next article for that. Give me a second. No, on that. Scam. No, here. So V1 credit account mining was fun. So just because protocol is modular, every credit account is its own. There were like 5,000 different smart contracts that everybody could deploy. And that was a ceremony that ate about $7.5 million of Ethereum. Well, it didn't eat actually because it was pre 1559, right? So it just paid to miners. We should have done it literally this month, but that's what happened then. That was fun. In terms of V1, quickly after launching V1, devs realized that there were quite a few shortcomings that wouldn't allow for an integration with context, for example, that would need to, the architecture would have to be redone. So V1 never really extended its limits. And even though it was fun to play with for some, it wasn't really a product offering that we were proud of. I don't know, subjective opinion. Me as a farmer, I didn't find much to do there. But that's because we pretty much quickly abandoned V1 to work in V2. But there were still a few things that were like learning lessons. First of all, it's indeed what we discussed now. Why was there a product push with V2 done for leverage stablecoin farming, STH farming, and stuff like that? Because we saw it even in Gearbox with small TVL, that is what people wanted to do. Because it was something passive, right? It was something easy. If people want a product offering of going X50 leverage in BTC or ETH, they rather do it on Binance, GMX, or somewhere else, right? Gearbox in terms of spot leverage, because it's spot will always be inferior to perps in terms of the leverage you can get. Because spot market, that's true in real world as well, right? Derivative markets are much bigger than spot. So what spot is more safe, what spot is more interesting, that is those essentially folded positions that can have leverage and they can pay well, but they are not as systemic risk as, let's say, going extend on an altcoin. The second learning thing that we saw is people don't actually want to use their altcoins, sorry for the word, as collateral. Like we didn't see much demand for that, even though we had like 1inch, Comp, Maker, Lido, CRV as like being able to leverage. And you could take like, I don't know, you could take even $5 million worth over a few accounts of borrowing power. Nobody really seemed to want it. And of course, one of the reasons for that is because Gearbox is still not very known. But I think second reason for that is that we don't really see long tail being that important in lending. Like it's cool that it's generalized primitive, like Euler does it, right? You can have collateral as anything really is generalized, but end of the day, 99% of assets and the fees and everything are in ETH, WBTC, and stables. So long tail is fun to have, but it's the question of, is it worth the risk? So in V2, of course, assets like LDO, CVF, CRV, which are being issued as rewards into credit accounts, they will need to be in the list of the things that you can interact with for being able to sell them, but their LTV will be extremely low. And it doesn't actually make the product worse because if your APY is about 5%, if you don't account for 5%, but LTV, let's say 25, and you account only for 1/4 of that, it doesn't make a position that much more inefficient. Like, of course, if you're like really trading every tick and everything, yes, you would lose some on efficiency, but it's extremely minimal. So yeah, collaterals as long tail not being popular much anywhere is one. Takeaway, and second is that people do like these passive positions. I think those two are the main takeaways for me. Ilgis, anything you want to add?
And also, I guess we see demand for leverage farming because we like have only two options for it. It was Wild Walls, USDC, and DAI. Yeah, not best option for farming, but still we have a lot of usage in the protocol, like people interested in such kind of stuff. So that's one of the reasons why we moved to leverage farming case.
Yep, that's very helpful. Yeah, do we have any more questions for Ivan? Gearbox.
I guess just one little one. If you could talk maybe a little bit about the start of liquidity mining. I guess you guys have so if you're starting liquidity mining for your own token, I'm guessing you're going to have to make it transferable then and tradable at that point.
No, the show goes on, still untransferable. It's an
Oh,
SBT,
okay, interesting. Okay.
sole bound ERC20. Yeah, so basically the vote is happening now. Then the interface will take into account whatever the votes will be. So let's say it will calculate how much and the optimal ratio tokens will be. An interface will be played for you, and you could see in an interface how much you're supposed to earn. But the claims would be updated every like 3-4 weeks or so, up until the token is transferable. Then it can be just moved to normal contracts.
Right.
So you can still like do that, accrue it, but not have it yet. So it's like a retroactive, but not retroactive because you know what happens.
Yeah, I guess that the challenge then you'll have is that you won't be able to report any meaningful APY if you don't know if the token that the liquidity mining token doesn't have a price.
Would benchmark it at whatever the vote was done, because that was the benchmark of the last DAO round. That wasn't too small, so like everybody openly accepted it as a valuation. So yes, of course, you should take those APYs with the degree of saltiness and recalculate it towards what you think the Gira protocol FGV should be, right? Whether it's higher or lower. But yeah, so we do of course want that advantage, otherwise it wouldn't even make sense to do it. But yeah, for users, we do of course have like notes and like helpers to explain that, guys, this is not real APY, this part is coming from like Fugazi made up story for now.
So I'm just kind of thinking, because I remember the original credit account mining, and there was a lot of gear distributed during that. Is that just kind of in your view, are those legacy tokens going to be a problem for the DAO that they have to kind of deal with, or is it something that's not a big deal?
What would you think the problem? There was like one of the distribution stages. So there was one stage of that, the other stage of that, the other stage of that. So it's more like you could see it like like what Optimism did with a few stages. Here it's also like a few stages, or what's the name of the protocol that does like P2P on top of Aave? Morpho. They also have these stages, right? So just different ways of community acquisition. Usually not so many are done before tokens get transferable. In this case, a few were done, but it doesn't change that much in terms of like the broad picture.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
I thought it was positive to community building because a lot of people came to community, joined to BanklessDAO, and still active in discussions, voting, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, many of them come at conferences like, oh yeah, I mined the credit account. I think if the token stays untransferable for another half a year, they would become into conferences with knives. So at that point, we would stop going to conferences. But yeah, no, it was great for community building. It was good timing still. The thing is that why we did it so early and at the hype stage, while we could have waited for ETH gas fees to go lower, because it was obvious they would at some point. The reason for that is we expected V1 to be more usable out of the gate, and it just turned out that it had too many shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
But still, those credit accounts and smart contracts, they all stay the same. What changes really are the credit managers in between. So pools that are right now there, Gearbox has like 8 million TVL, I think, for now still, that are fully idle, they will stay the same. It's just that how you are able to take and borrow that gluing piece between credit accounts that were deployed, those 5,000 and the pools, that part is changing. So it doesn't need to redeploy the entire thing.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's okay. I was kind of thinking of, I was kind of thinking of those original credit account, like the mining of those original credit accounts as being sort of a waste because V2 or because V1 didn't pan out.
That would have been terrible. That would have been such a disgrace. I would have quit, honestly. I think Des would have quit as well if that was the case. Because when we were doing V2, we were like, guys, if you don't have to redeploy them, right? People would kill us because that would be the most dumb way of spending $7.5 million just to pay for miners.
Okay, that clears it all up. Thanks.
Yeah, all good on that front. Yeah.
I didn't want to say that just in case that is what happened, but that's good to hear.
That would be sad. That would be sad as hell. Yeah. But no, that's what like the architecture is modular. So down the line, once we realize that most of the protocols we want to see integrated are there, and the future ones simply add more systemic risk, there could be separate pools, and separate credit managers that have different whitelisting criteria, that have, let's say, higher LTVs for altcoins, and that could even have like a casino dashboard thing where you could, like, I don't know, X5 Lux token or something. That could be done. But of course, early on in protocol life, it's too difficult to do since it fragments liquidity and fragments users too much.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Great questions. I think we covered everything, right?
Solid presentation. A lot of insight. Do you have any more questions for Ivan? If not, just thank you, Evan, for the presentation, and congratulations on V2. And we really look forward to the launch.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for inviting us to chat. Thank you for great questions and looking for Gearbox. Shoot any questions you have in Telegram, Discord, Twitter, doesn't matter. And if you have questions on what exactly will be available to farm or what liquidity mining will look like, also ping us, can help explain it so we can grow it together and revive DeFi in a way.
Yeah, sure. And definitely look forward to collaborate with you guys in all possible ways. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
everybody.
Have a
Thanks,
good day,
Ivan.
everyone.
Really
Thank you.
great.
Thanks, Ivan.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.